Hello everyone, my name is Davik and thank you so much for tuning into the video. First things first, yes, the quarantine beard is gone, but I finally feel human and not like a bear, so it's probably for the better. And sticking with the WWDC theme I was talking about last week with Siri, today I actually wanted to talk about some improvements I want to see in iOS. And of course, iOS is Apple's bread and butter, and it's a great operating system, but there's definitely some ways it can be improved. And yeah, I just wanted to talk about that today. With that said, let's roll the video. So, if you didn't see the last video, essentially WWDC is Apple's software conference where they talk about iPadOS, macOS, iOS, watchOS, every OS that they have, most software stuff they talk about in this conference. And yeah, if you haven't checked it out, it's definitely a great time. Sometimes they have product launches as well, which is always cool. So the first thing that I want to see in iOS is an improved notification system. And they've done a lot of work as is, don't get me wrong, in improving the notification system. Like at a previous time, we actually didn't have stacks, which is definitely very useful now, having all the notifications for an application in one stack. But there's still some work to be done here. Especially when it comes to recent notifications. So sometimes the recent notifications, we see that, the most recent one is on its own bubble, which I don't think is a great way of doing it. Just because now, if you want to clear stuff, first you have to clear the individual recent ones, and then you have to clear the ones below. I think a better way of doing it is to move the stack up and just put the most recent notification on top of that so you can clear all the notifications at once again. On top of that, I'd really like to see a way where even for the recent notifications, there's a way to clear all the notifications as is. Because right now what you have to do is you have to drag up, clear all the recent ones, and then after that, click the X and clear all, which is sort of cumbersome. I wish there was some way of doing a clear all for all the notifications, even the recent ones, because I think that would definitely be a lot better. Because I know for myself, I end up spending a lot of time just clearing notifications. So yeah, Apple, please find a way to improve that notification system. So along that theme, I think one thing that'd be really nice as well is to have a way of putting like an expiring notifications timer or something like that. For example, in my notifications banner right now, sometimes I'll forget to clear stuff, and so it'll get really cluttered after a while. All that stuff from like last week on there, or like from a couple days ago, which I don't really care about anymore. I saw the notification. So if there's a way in the settings itself to say that after 2 or 3 days, can you automatically delete this notification or just like remove it? I think that's definitely something that could be very useful, and something Apple should explore adding into iOS. I think also giving us an option of, if those little bubbles over the apps which tell you how many notifications from the app itself you have, there's some way of clearing that natively through the system. I think that'd be a lot nicer, because I have a bunch from apps that I haven't used, but they just unnecessarily clutter my home screen. And so yeah, if those little bubble things, if there's some way in the settings itself to say, okay, clear all of those, I think that'd be really nice, because sometimes I even go through the some apps I haven't used very frequently, and I try finding ways to clear that notification icon or the one bubble thing, and I can't do that. I can't find a way, and it's just always sticking there until I delete the app. And so I really wish there was a way natively in the system just to get rid of that. Just at least like the ones that are all currently there, and then whatever new ones come on, you can just click the button again and it'll be gone. Because that's definitely something that annoys me a lot. So now that we've talked about the iOS notification system, let's talk about the default apps. And that's the second thing I want to see. I want to see an improvement in the default apps in iOS. And yeah, some changes are pretty small, but some apps especially could use some very big changes. And I know a lot of people use the default apps in iOS because the integration with Apple is amazing. But at the same time, there's a lot of ways they can improve it still. So the first app I want to talk about is Mail. And Mail's been long overdue for an overhaul. So stuff like, maybe having a draft timer. So if you have a draft email, a timer when you want to send that email, instead of having to come back to the app at a certain time to send it. Better categorization of mail. Having everything in one inbox is definitely like, it was okay 5 or 10 years ago, but with the mail apps that we have right now, it's a lot nicer to see like a focused inbox and a more spam inbox and stuff like that, just because everybody's mail is getting flooded with a bunch of newsletters and God knows what, and sometimes the stuff we want to focus on gets lost. And especially with all inbox, sometimes it can be really hard to find out what's relevant in there. So talk about messages. Let me add people in those messages. Let me reply to specific messages. Let me retract a message or edit a message retroactively. And just in general, find a better way of attaching photos. I think, all 4 of those changes are definitely something that other messaging apps have improved on, but for some reason, iMessages hasn't had. And especially like replying to people on group chat by adding them, or replying to specific messages. Those are things that almost every other messaging app has, and I think that's definitely something Apple should look into adding into iMessages. So if you want to call the Apple keyboard an app, I think 2 things they should definitely add is integrated GIF search and integrated emoji search. And I know for myself, that's the biggest reasons I'm still with Google Keyboard, even though I prefer the Apple keyboard, especially now that they added swipe. For some reason, they don't have those 2 things, and I think it'd be really nice to have, just because those are 2 things that people use in the daily messaging, in their daily lives, and so definitely like having those 2 things would be really nice, and provide a good reason not to move to any other keyboard. Because I think a lot of people are probably in the same boat, where that's 2 of the reasons they're sticking with other keyboards. A small thing to add in mobile is a way to close all your Safari tabs at once, because I know a lot of people have probably been in the same situation as me, where you have a bunch of mobile Safari tabs and swiping or clicking the X. It becomes very cumbersome, so just a way to clear all would be really nice. I think another thing they could do is group tabs by categories or by websites. So for example, if you have a bunch of Facebook tabs open, a bunch of, UPS parcel tabs open, a bunch of Reddit tabs open, group them together. And that way we can choose what tabs we want to access if we don't necessarily want to close all of them, rather than just having a random big mess based on the most recent. In Wallet, let me clear my old passes, give me the option to at least. I know some people are nostalgic and they want to see what flights they've been on and stuff like that, but for myself, I want to clear it, and it becomes very cluttered. Especially, I think this is sort of the theme, a lot of the stuff I'm talking about in the default apps or just in general in iOS. The manual work of having to clear all rather than just having a button is definitely something that a lot of the apps can benefit from, and I hope is introduced as a big new feature in a lot of these apps, because I know for myself it can become very cumbersome. And the whole point of iOS in general is, how do you make the most simple and efficient system? How do you provide the least amount of time to do daily tasks? And so that's definitely something I think they should think about adding, because it definitely helps them towards that goal. So this is sort of with the calendar, but it would be nice to be able to schedule FaceTime calls inside the calendar itself. And because, I'm always on coffee chats and stuff with people, it'd be nice to just through iCal itself be able to schedule, okay, here's a FaceTime call with the other person if their FaceTime ID is linked to their email or their phone number. Because I know Google has that with Google Meet, and there's other platforms as well. So having that in FaceTime will encourage people not to even leave the ecosystem in that regard. And FaceTime is definitely a great system for video chatting. So that'd be really nice to have. Yeah. So now that we've talked about improvements to the default app, let me just talk about the system level stuff. First things first, in the task manager, it'd be really nice to just have a clear all, like I mentioned previously. But I know swiping up and up and up is so cumbersome compared to just clicking an X or something. Instead, that would go a long way. So the next thing I want to talk about is, let me blacklist unused apps. And what I mean by that is, in iOS, there's a feature that allows you to iOS to automatically delete apps that you don't use, so you can save storage. And if you're like me on a 64 gig phone, yeah, you need that storage. But regardless, iOS doesn't really let you choose what qualifies as an unused app. And so I've already been in the situation quite a few times where there's an app that I want to use, but it's not there for me. And so allowing me to sort of choose that duration, and for certain apps that I might not use all the time, but I really need to use at the moment, I can't wait for it to download, because those moments that I do need to use it, I need to make sure that it is working. Let me blacklist those. And I don't think that should be too hard to implement, and I think that's definitely something that they should add. This next small improvement is something that a lot of people have been asking for iOS for a while now, but allowing us to a better system of allowing us to change the ringer or media volume, because when you click on the left or right, it depends which screen you're on or like what you're doing, but it'll automatically change the volume. But unless you go into the settings, that's the only way to actually properly do it, choosing between a media and a ringer. But if there's some way, even the volume switcher, to better be able to do that, I think that will go a long way. Another improvement to the system level, and you can look at my previous video for this, but improved Siri. I think it's definitely long overdue to see a better improved Siri, and there's definitely some stuff they should be doing. You can check that out here, and yeah. The last thing I want to talk about on a system level is I want to see the ability to change the default apps. And a lot of you have probably been in the same situation, but I don't use Apple Maps. I use Google Maps just because I prefer it. The worst thing is, when I have an address or something, it says, Maps isn't installed. Go on to the App Store and install Maps. But because I use Google Maps, they should allow me to at least change the default apps. And I understand from Apple's perspective, yes, there is incentive to make people go to Apple Maps by making the default app all the iOS apps as it is right now. But as the ecosystem expands and as they want more customers to come in, this is something that they should definitely take into consideration, because one of the things that makes iOS or made the iPhone so great was the apps that it allowed you to get, and not being able to choose the default apps sort of takes away from that, takes away from the App Store developers' ability to provide apps of value, because if you can't make it a default, there's always going to be that cumbersome process for your users. And so allowing us to make default apps, at least for certain things, I think will go a long way. Of course, there are many more additions I would like to see, and I could go on and on about this, but I'm just going to end it here because I think this is a pretty good note. If you have any improvements you think I might have missed, please feel free to leave them in the comment section or DM me. I always love to hear what other people have to say as well. But other than that, I hope this was a good video. I hope you enjoyed it. And yeah, stay tuned till the next video. I have a lot more coming out. If you're interested in this type of stuff, check out the series WWDC video I made last time, and I also have one on SpaceX launch. I have a lot of more content coming planned up. I might do one for macOS too. Let's see how it goes and some of the improvements I think from that perspective. But of course, I have more other videos coming up too on product analysis and stuff that's really near and dear to me. So yeah, stay tuned for that. If you liked the video, perhaps like, subscribe, and yeah, thank you so much, guys. Till the next one. Peace.